Today we have Erica and Sandeep from Seattle. Nice. You all usually tape your podcast remotely. What's the best thing about being in the flesh together, or the worst?
I actually love being in person. I think it's much better.
I actually think it's better
because I can wave my hands and Sandeep will see me.
Yeah, we've been talking about it. We've been talking about doing it more in person. I like it in person too. I mean, I think on Zoom we probably can talk it over each other more and be meaner. Yeah, right back.
You got to be nicer in person. Although you can flip each other off. You can flip each other off when you're in person, and it doesn't get on the tape, and I love that. Not that I do that. We're here in person. It's time for Sound Politics. Welcome to Sound Politics, the show about the people, policies, and perspectives shaping our government here in Washington State. I'm Scott Greenstone. And this week, we're talking about some big departures in local government. A few weeks ago, King County Executive Constantine announced he will not be running for re-election next year. Constantine's tenure stretches back to 2009, making him the longest-serving King County executive in modern history. And just Wednesday, Seattle City Councilmember Tammy announced she's resigning from her seat on the council effective January 6th. She alleges other council members undermined her and have created a toxic, undemocratic environment. But it's not just Seattle or King County. From the state legislature all the way up to Congress, the last couple of years have seen a huge wave of political retirements and resignations, many of them much earlier than expected. So what's behind it? Is it the toxic atmosphere in City Hall that Morales is talking about? Is it the challenges local governments are facing? Or just politics generally being terrible? We're digging into these questions with political strategist Sandeep Kaushik and PubliCola editor and publisher Erica Barnett. Hey, Sandeep. Hey, Erica.
Hello.
Hey.
Before we get too deep into the conversation, I just want to note that my partner works for the mayor, so I steer clear of covering City Hall. That's why we're leaning on Sandeep and Erica today, and I'll mostly be directing traffic, refereeing the skirmish. So first off, let's start out with the newest. The announcement from Seattle City Councilmember Tammy that she's resigning from the council. And if you don't live in Seattle or you aren't obsessed with City Hall, Morales is the last progressive left over from the 2020 council. The rest have retired or lost re-election to a more business-friendly pro-police council. So, Erica, you have talked with Morales. What were the reasons that she gave for resigning?
Well, essentially, she said that she, as you said, has been undermined, and she gave really specific examples that I've covered, over the past year of the council essentially not letting her do things from really non-controversial proposals or proposals that would have been non-controversial, like density bonuses for small community developers, to just shooting down ideas that were progressive and that probably would not have passed on this council anyway, but doing so in a manner that was just really aggressive. Like, Bob Kettle, new council member, accusing her of being responsible for the lack of police officers when she voted down or she voted against CCTV surveillance of neighborhoods. He said, how dare you vote against the solution to this problem that you caused? And sort of personalized it that way. I mean, I would say the very first thing they did was appointing the person that she had just defeated to the city council.
Tanya Wu.
Right. Tanya Wu lost in District 2, and they appointed her to a citywide seat immediately, which was, I thought undemocratic and very obviously insulting.
I want to ask you your take on this is, Sandeep, but, in last month's election, Tanya Wu lost, and Seattle voters resoundingly chose a progressive who's a lot like Morales, Alexis Mercedes Rank. She's a young, tax-the-rich urbanist type, upzoning for more apartments, social housing, etc. But she'll be the only progressive come January because I assume the council will replace Morales with someone more like most of them, right? Not so into taxing businesses, more pro-police. So I am kind of surprised Morales is stepping down now. Maybe it speaks to the weight of this decision. But do you all think that she could have worked with Mercedes Rank and maybe the others to get anything done, Sandeep?
Yeah, I think this is a big blow for the Seattle left that she's leaving now, and it is a surprise, right? Nobody really saw this coming, and the narrative that Tammy's creating, I have significant problems with a lot of the narrative Tammy's creating about her departure, from the "ooh, poor persecuted me" stuff to it doesn't matter if I leave anyway because I couldn't get anything done because there's this monolithic supermajority block of reactionary council members who won't support anything I would ever want to do or anything that's sort of good and, good about the world. And I just don't think that narrative is right. I mean, I think we saw even recently during the budget process, I think people were surprised by the fact that when Kathy Moore, council member that's supposedly part of this conservative majority, brought forward a municipal capital gains tax, progressive taxation proposal. It very clearly is coming back in the spring, or at least it was going to be coming back in the spring. And I think it was a live issue that could have passed. I think now that Tammy is going to be gone from the council, I think the chances of something progressive like that happening with this council are going to be less.
Erica, yeah.
Kathy Moore is a good example, actually, of what Tammy was talking about when she, essentially conflated, or not essentially, literally conflated Tammy Morales with Kshama Sawant, who left the council, is not on the council, and was a firebrand who was constantly denouncing her colleagues.
Right.
Kathy Moore quoted Tammy Morales as saying all these things about, the council is corporate shills and the council, does
evil. I think I read.
Yeah. I mean, things that Tammy Morales has never said, publicly anyway, and are not, in her personality as I know it, but they are things that Kshama Sawant said. So, I mean, she was just kind of conflated with this evil past council in a way that, that I think is unfair, because I don't think she was anything like Kshama Sawant except in some of their political leanings.
I think what we're talking about here, too, is like the tone, right? What tone do you have? Kshama Sawant had a tone that was criticizing AOC, right? She had a tone that was more like a bomb thrower, right? And Alexis not. I don't know if that's really like a left-right thing.
Right. I think it's more an approach to governance thing.
I mean, and I think, nobody saw this coming, Sandeep, is not true. I mean, I started asking about this months ago because it was quite obvious that Tammy Morales had no ability to get anything done because she was obstructed at every turn. Like I said, on stuff that was just not controversial before. I mean, during the budget process, there's a consent package that they all agree on. And that is what, it's the budget chair says, what is your absolute, top one or two priorities? That usually goes through without a bunch of debate because, council members are independently elected and they respect each other, historically have respected each other's top priorities. And I mean, one after another, Morales's top priorities, unlike any other council member, 1 out of 8, they got pulled out and voted down and pulled out and voted down. And it was just an aggressive, it's not a tone, it's actions that make it hard for someone to do their job when everybody is, aggressively undermining you at every single turn.
And she's doing the same to them and has from day one.
She's in the minority. How is that possible?
It takes 2 to tango is what I'm saying.
Sandeep, you don't have any examples of her doing that.
I do.
Nor would she be able to because she's not in the majority.
The stuff you say that she put forward that was uncontroversial, she made no effort to reach out to her colleagues about. She dropped stuff. And
she had been, that's not true. She had 5 committee meetings. She had 5 committee meetings with that council on the thing and not to get too into the weeds on this. Sure. Sorry, Scott, but that particular one, you're saying she made no effort. She had 5 committee meetings.
Here's what I want to just to zoom out a little bit. Right.
Thank you.
Yes.
I am reminded of what Republicans complain about in Olympia, right? Because they're not the majority and they don't set the rules. So I am curious, Erica. Could you zoom out and just say, is what she's describing? You have covered City Hall for a long time. Does it seem abnormal to you, or is it just the reality of governing in the minority where people don't really care about what your priorities are?
It is abnormal. Okay. And the reason I say that, it's not abnormal to lose. It's not abnormal to be on the end of 8-1 votes. Nick Licata was famous for being on the end of 8-1 votes all the time, worked fine with his colleagues, and he lost and it went on with his life. That's what happens when you're in the minority. Totally agree with that. What's unusual is we have 6 brand new council members who have come in, and as I said, think that they, are the first people to ever be on city council. And this is not the first; they're hardly the first city council members who have come in like that. But, but the way that they have behaved towards Tammy Morales is just, I mean, it's sort of graceless. And I mean, I will say Rob Saka, who is one of the new council members, told KUOW in response to, he sort of asked for a statement about Tammy leaving and the reasons that she said she left. And he said that, oh, it's hyperbole. And, and we've totally worked with her. And, and I'm sorry if she thinks I'm paraphrasing, but this very kind of, not very classy statement, kind of denouncing her even as, he's being given an opportunity to say something, kind or graceful. And
I should say not all of his colleagues responded that way. Tanya Wu, not that Tanya is on the council anymore as of a couple days ago, but she was, I think, pretty gracious in a statement.
And Sarah Nelson put out, a short kind of bland statement for sure. But I guess what I'm saying is what is unusual about this council is the way that they kind of don't seem to feel a need to show collegiality. And one of the things that Morales said to me is, on the previous council, she, had a good working relationship with the most conservative member, Alex Peterson, and they even sponsored legislation together. So, I do think it's different.
I don't think it's particularly different. First of all, I will say two things here. One, there is a level of toxicity and lack of collegiality or whatever that exists on this current council, that existed on the previous council, and that dates back for a while. Well, part of it started, with Sawant coming on the council, but it was not entirely her. There is a level of, kind of anger and toxicity that's existed and division that's existed at the city council for a while that I think has been undermining the ability of the city to govern itself effectively, and that goes back well before this council. So that's one thing. Secondly, I think a lot of that toxicity and anger has come from elements of, what we might call, what my former boss recently called, that Dan Savage called the insufferable left, right? And that Tammy has kind of hand-waved away a lot of behaviors, not just Tammy, but a lot of people on the left have hand-waved away a lot of behaviors directed at people who disagree with their progressive agendas.
But you're talking about members of the public objecting to something that their elected representatives do, and they have a right to do that.
This is loud stuff in public comment meetings.
Well, it happens there, but whether it was Tammy or some of the other council members who egged it on,
How did Tammy egg it on? You said
okay. This is a 25-minute podcast.
Sorry,
I do want to talk about county government, so we're going to actually shift. I think that everyone made points, and
as you can tell, we're continuing an argument we had yesterday.
I love it.
And we will keep arguing forever if you don't stop us.
If you love that argument, you can listen to Seattle Nice.
We drop more F-bombs on that one.
Yeah, that's not public radio.
Yeah, you want to talk about toxicity.
So let's shift over to county government right down the street for our downtown government nerds. For seemingly much different reasons, King County Executive Dow Constantine is retiring next year after 4 terms running the PNW's biggest county. A quarter of the state's residents, if I remember right, live here in King County, and Constantine has run this county longer than anyone. He was elected back in 2009, Obama's first term. My producer was sending me just things that he has been in office longer than, like franchises. So, for instance, Angry Birds, the Avatar movies, Jersey Shore. That made me feel old, actually.
Scott, you're just trying to make us feel old.
Yeah, that's all this is.
Dow Constantine has been in office longer than Jersey Shore has been around.
He
said,
"Stop it with the ageism."
He said he's not running because it's time for new leadership. Sandeep, Constantine has held this position longer than anyone else. You worked on his first campaign in 2009.
I did, yeah.
What do you think he'll be remembered for?
Well, I think the county's been sort of a much quieter, government and space in the city. But that said, I think there are a number of legacy things that we can point to about Dow's 4 terms in office, right? I mean, Best Starts for Kids, right? A program,
a levy,
a levy, and a program that the county has been running to address disparities related to children in marginalized or poor communities, right? I think that's a significant effort that's made a difference. Passing a couple years ago, that's just now coming online, this major new levy to fund, mental health and addiction centers, right? 5 of them.
The crisis
care
care
centers.
The
crisis care centers levy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we could talk about, Constantine's tenure without talking about how he's handled homelessness at the county. When the pandemic hit, he spent millions to buy hotels that were sitting empty and turn them into homeless shelters.
Yeah.
But despite all those efforts, right, homelessness has nearly doubled in the time he's been executive. And I think people will point to things like the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, which he helped set up. He's been the one constant through that organization's existence, and it's gone through 4 CEOs in 5 years. And in fact, in a minute, we're going to talk about people ready to succeed DOW, and one of them wants to dismantle it. 2 of them are open to it. So Erica, you've covered homelessness extensively. Do you think people will associate DOW with a focus on bureaucracy rather than results?
I mean, it's so interesting that the county hasn't gotten the same kind of scrutiny on this stuff that the city of Seattle has, because the county funds half of the King County Regional. I mean, county is in the name, the Regional Homelessness Authority. But I think that is likely to kind of continue into DOW's sort of legacy conversations, because, I mean, Bruce Harrell has been really, the mayor of Seattle has been very, very vocal about, his problems with the King County Homelessness Authority, pulled back money from KCRHA to the city. Well, I mean, what the county has done is basically hold funding steady, just like the city has. They're not out there like putting more money into it, saying they want to really beef it up. They've just kind of been quiet, and so I think that that's like threading a political needle. But it's absolutely true that King County has not contributed, significantly to addressing the problem any more than the city of Seattle is, except for putting money in. And I think it just kind of speaks to the fact that there's also not a King County beat in local reporting.
Totally. When we're talking about media, unfortunately,
and so I think if people were hounding Dow Constantine the way they hounded him about the jail, for example, it would be a much different story.
Even the school board. Look at what's happening with the Seattle schools. Gosh. We were just talking in the green room. You want to talk about levels of toxicity within a government entity. The school board has been out of hand for years now. Nobody was paying any attention as really consequential decisions were getting made that have been, have now led to this huge blow up over school closure. Anyway,
they proposed closing a bunch of schools, backed off when there was a huge backlash, and now they're not going to close any, apparently.
For now.
So I want to ask, I want to talk about these candidates. So 3 candidates have thrown their names in to succeed Dow Constantine. There is, I mentioned him earlier, John Arthur Wilson. He's the county assessor. That's the guy whose appraisers assign property values. Very important. He talked about scrubbing the authority and hiring more sheriffs and behavioral health caseworkers. Also running is King County Councilmember Claudia Balducci, who represents the East Side. She worked for and even ran the county jails. And finally, County Councilmember Gurmai Zahalai, who is maybe the most like Dow Constantine to me. They both, supported shutting down the youth jail, and then when the deadline for that got closer, they doubled back on those promises. What do you all think voters are going to have to consider when they weigh these 3 candidates? Like, where are the battle lines being drawn, Sandeep?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of different ways you can think about a county executive campaign, and one is, you win this race kind of on a geographical basis. Either you start in the suburbs and then build in towards the city of Seattle, right? The city's about 1/3 of the vote, and the suburbs about 2/3 of the vote. Or you start with your base in Seattle and build outwards into the suburbs, right? I think Gurmai's a candidate that's sort of starting in Seattle and is going to build out towards the suburbs. Claudia, is clearly somebody from Bellevue who's going to start kind of try to consolidate a more suburban base and then sort of build her campaign inwards into Seattle. And I think John Arthur Wilson I'm not 100% sure where he's going with this, but I think the public safety emphasis says to me he wants to kind of start outside Seattle and then come back in. So that's one way to do it. And then, substantively, there probably aren't a lot of substantive policy differences.
These are 3 Democrats.
These are 3 Democrats, But I do think on some of the hot button stuff around the debates we've had, certainly in the city of Seattle, around abolitionist sort of sentiments, no youth jail, right, versus more, traditional public safety sort of sentiments. I think those things are going to come into play in a big way in this race. And I think Girmay's vote to back off the youth jail stuff was, in part related to the fact that he knew he was going to be running for King County executive, and that there was an issue on of being perceived as too far over on that stuff.
I wanted to ask you about this, Erica, too, because I brought up everyone's criminal justice stances because King County runs much of the region's criminal legal system, including courts and jails, and that's where a lot of the political flashpoints have been. Do you think with this turnover in leadership, are we at a philosophical crossroads in terms of incarceration and law enforcement?
I mean, we are at a crossroads simply because Dow Constantine has been in there so long. Yeah. And I think that, Sandeep is right. I don't think that Girmay and Claudia are actually that far apart on the jail stuff. Yeah. I do think that Girmay certainly, made the same sort of statements that everybody made and that Dow Constantine made, and later I think regretted politically about closing down the youth jail and even closing down the downtown Seattle jail. And Claudia Balducci, is the former jail director. Yeah. And when we talked this week, one of the things that she said to me is because I asked her about the city of Seattle wanting to sort of warehouse more people in that downtown jail for low level misdemeanors like using drugs, and and her position was basically, look, it is our job to take people from city police departments and put them in the jails if they want us to do that. And so I think she is definitely not going to be, it never has been a sort of lefty firebrand on that issue.
Yeah, Girmay has a real base in the what I call the quote unquote progressive Borg of kind of Washington State, right?
Look for that phrase to start showing up on Seattle Nights.
Yeah, but the president who I work for on.
I do want to say he also has a strong story. I've always been struck by his story. Right, he came over with his family from Sudan as refugees. He lived in homeless shelters and public housing. He's a South King County kid.
Talented, charismatic, great story, absolutely
good at politics.
All true.
Okay, I want to wrap this all up with this question. Dow follows this trend where we have seen people retiring or resigning early with no next steps. Right, I first noticed it, last year or 2 years ago when we had the biggest wave of turnover in the state legislature since anyone I asked could remember. Earlier this year, we had Derek Kilmer and Kathy McMorris Rogers retire from Congress. They're young for politicians, 50 and 55, respectively. What do you think is behind this resignation trend? Is it big city problems or an inability to work with people who disagree with you? Trump, nihilism? Erica, I want to start with you.
I think, I don't think that there is one single answer. I think Dow Constantine leaving was pretty predicted. That was, people thought he was going to not run again the last time. But I do think that there is truth in what Sandeep was saying about divisiveness in general. And I think that it is, from the tiniest city council, I've covered the city of Burien, up to the legislature and, at the state level, there's just, it's hard for people to work together. I think people get in the legislature, particularly progressives, get in and they think they're going to be able to do a lot more than they actually can do as state legislators. It's a long game if you want to be effective. And so, I think that there's all of that's in play. And nihilism. There is it is so. From what I hear, I don't hear as much Sandeep as a political consultant, but it is hard to recruit candidates to run for offices now. It is very, very hard because people just don't want to be in the middle of all that. So it's understandable that once they get in there and they see this is what it's like, that they're like, you know what, I can make more money and not get, harassed every day, doing something else.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I would say this. I think the overarching story in the last 30 years of American politics, whatever level of government we want to talk about, is a story of increasing and extreme polarization, right? And whether it's at the national level, starting in the, Gingrich era in the 90s, we have seen the two parties pulling farther and farther apart and becoming more polarized, the two bases, right? We're almost living in two different Americas right now, red America and blue America, right? And that has profound consequences for how we govern or what the quality of the experience is to be involved in government, right? And so I think you see a lot of people in Congress saying this body is now so polarized, it's dysfunctional. I can't get anything done. Why am I doing this? And I have to take all this crap from the other side or people, and so
the public.
The public. Why bother? And that what started at the national level has now filtered down to the state level. You have a huge gap between the parties and really deep divides even within the Democratic Party. In Olympia, and we were just talking about at the city level now, right?
Yeah.
I mean, all these folks in city government are Democrats, right? They're all some shade of blue, yet the divides and the polarization is really intense.
Well, thank you both for getting to at least having a civil conversation, sharing your Seattle nights with me, mostly civil. Political consultant Sandeep Kaushik and PubliCola editor and publisher Erica Barnett. Thank you for joining me.
Hey, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
That's it for Sound Politics today. Today's show was produced by Noel Gasca. Our editor is Gabe Spitzer. And we'll be back next week with more Sound Politics. Consider supporting the show by making a donation. The link is in the show notes or at kuow.org/politics. We'll see you next week.